Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Gold Hoops and God podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Guerra, and on this episode, I have Dr. Claudia Cerrato. Dr. Claudia is an Indigenous cultural anthropologist. Welcome, Dr. Claudia.
Hello.
It's so good to have her here. She's amazing, and I'm going to let her kind of talk a little bit about the work that she does before we dive in.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes, I am a cultural and a culinary anthropologist. And so I study the ways in which culture is preserved and regenerated through the indigenous culinary art. I'm also really interested in ways to preserve and protect ancestral taste memory.
Mm,
My work initially began as a way to protect and recover this memory as a result of of colonization, assimilation, acculturation, and this venture eventually led me to enter different indigenous kitchen spaces. I have always considered my kitchen a sacred space, and but working with other Native chefs throughout the country, as we met and collaborated through the Native American Culinary Association, actually back in 2012, we actually realized that, as much as we thought that food was our calling, we realized that it was a different kind of calling. It was more of a responsibility.
mm,
And so I've been able to, truly merge research and academia and cooking.
mm,
And so together, I've been able to work with different generations here in Los Angeles, particularly from youth to young adults to older adults and elders. And I go about this through workshops, through pláticas, through círculos, through food demos, also in the classroom. I am also, and I do teach ethic and food studies. And I also do that online. I've created my own classes where I have community members like log in. And again, it's really doing my best to make knowledge, cultural knowledge accessible.
mm,
I don't believe in gatekeeping. And so for me, it's been really vital to, make my work accessible
mm,
and immersive. So
mm.
that way we can continue to fulfill some of the ancestral prophecies where we, revitalize and continue to thrive in our indigenous excellence.
Oh, I love that. And just excellence. Absolutely. I think that's such an important point because I believe that a lot of times many of us in school are taught that the only things that are valuable, quote unquote, come from Europe, right? Literature, foods, French cuisine, right? If we're thinking about food, that is, the height of perfection, and that is what needs to be preserved and you know, elevated and all those things. And so I love that your work is really focusing on the preservation of memory, right? The preservation of ancestral memory and the importance of these different food practices. I really love that. And it's so interesting what you mentioned as far as the kitchen. The kitchen is sacred. I agree with you 1,000%. And so it's interesting, and I want to mention this. So, especially in U.S. Latinx theology, U.S. Latina theology, there's this theme that we always talk about of lo cotidiano, right? So daily life, like that is a locus, right? That is a locus in which we encounter God, we encounter the divine spirit, however a person wants to envision that. But that happens in the everyday. That happens when you're, making tamales with your family. That happens when you're, chismeando with your abuelita, having café and pan dulce, which was very much something that I would do with my mom and grandmother growing up. Is
Mhm.
like after school, we'd go over there. There was always, either a galletita, pancitos, something like that that we would share together. So I love the work that you do and what you shared about that. It's very
Thank
cool.
you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And so, on the podcast, I really, invite folks to think about Latina identity, especially because I think that there is this assumption of, certain characteristics, for example, that we all speak Spanish, that we're all Christian, that we all, right, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of assumptions about what makes a Latina Latina. And there's even been this trend recently where people are pretty transparent and vulnerable of feeling like not Latina enough, right? Feeling called out, feeling like, oh, well, you're, really fair skinned. Are you really Latina? Or, oh, your Spanish is really bad. Are you really Latina? And of course, like the pushback of like, it's not this, I think gatekeeping is a really good word. It's not like a club to be in or out of, right? The sense of like who is judging, like who is judging, like who can be counted or not counted. And so I would love if you don't mind sharing with us a little bit about your background and kind of like your perspective on identity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can truly relate a lot to what you're saying, especially because I am a US born Latina. And and I have, my identity has shifted. It's just part of our experience, right? Especially as Chicanas and Nepaleras,
Mhm.
we're constantly navigating, spaces in between, and
Mhm.
even these hyphenated identities.
Oh yeah.
And but the one thing I find really particular, especially in my background, is that I was raised, or I do come from a very close knit family. We're a very small family,
Mhm.
and my generation, or I was the first born here in the US. And so, my family were from different estados in Mexico.
Mhm.
So we are from Michoacan, San Luis Potosí, and Zacatecas. And Mexicali, which is a border town in Baja, was our entry point into the US. And so, me being raised in El Este de Los Angeles in East LA, we constantly had like family coming in from Mexicali, or
Mhm.
my mother and my grandfather would take me to Mexicali, and I would spend
Mhm.
time with my grandmother there. And so I was, because my parents also had me at a very young age, I was around a lot of abuelos and abuelas, and then
Elders.
their friends.
Sure, the
Yes,
elders, yeah.
the elders. And so I was raised in this particular way of being like a niña buena, so a little girl that
Oh.
knows, how to behave, how to
Mhm.
show
Respeto,
respect.
of course.
Yes, right, to the
Manners,
adults,
respect, like, yep.
manners.
Mhm.
But I also was given a lot of opportunity to explore the world. And the world that I lived in was, it was East LA on Vancouver Avenue, right in front of Garfield High School. And,
Oh,
the block had a bunch of children at the time when I lived there. So we
I
were
love it.
always,
LA,
you
LA.
know,
So you're LA, LA, like I'm LA,
yeah,
LA. Yeah,
yeah.
I love
And
it.
so
I
we
grew up
were
in
just,
Koreatown, so yeah.
okay, yeah. And so we were always playing. Like there was always something going on. And, my dad had a particular whistle that he would whistle, and I would hear it down the street, and I'd be like, oh, it's
Yep,
time to go
yeah.
home. And so that was one experience. And then being and spending so much time in Mexicali,
Mhm.
I was also, allowed to climb trees. I was allowed to run with some of the, the small town, the small ejido. It was a really small ejido,
Mhm.
with the communities there, right? And
Mhm.
the youth there.
Mhm.
And so we would go to the canales, we'd go to the rivers, we'd
Wow.
go, to all these places.
Be
And
free and explore. That's so good.
there was a lot of exploration,
That's
right?
so cool.
And but what brought it all together, it
Mhm.
was that, everything that I participated in affirmed my identity, and not as a Mexican American, but as a Mexicana,
I love
right?
it.
And back then I didn't know, Latina, and then, the other term that I
All the
don't
labels.
agree with. Yeah, all the labels, right?
Uh-huh.
And so that was the only world I knew. And so, my family, because again, we were really small, we'd come together and we'd have major cookouts.
Oh.
And the food was very, very traditional. We had nopales all the time. We had frijoles de la olla time, and my mom would cook them in barro. And I was in charge when I was of age, to make the salsa. And I would use my grandmother's molcajete,
Mm.
and I would, grind and make the salsa for the
That's
family.
amazing.
And it was just, really, really like beautiful, the way that I was immersed, right,
Mhm.
in my cultura and the elder teachings.
Mhm.
And and so my early foraging experiences were going out to the canales and finding clams in the bottom. So we would use our feet, right, to
Oh my god.
forage. But nobody told me, oh, that's
Wow.
foraging. I didn't have
Right,
that
right. It's like, what?
vocabulary.
Yeah, yeah.
It just
A
wasn't
technical
exists.
term. Exactly. So this is what we do. Yeah, I love it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And and with my father, he used to take me out to Malibu, and we used to
Mm.
climb down the hills, and we used to gather abalone.
Wow.
And I remember, years later, I asked my dad. I said, "Hey, Dad, like, how come we stopped doing that?"
Mm.
And he looked at me and he was like, "Oh, it's because I got a ticket, you know." And of course, later on, as I got educated and began to realize colonial impact on
Uh-huh.
identity, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, my dad
And
got
racism and
a ticket."
policing and all that.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly, for
Yeah.
wanting to assert his sovereignty, for being indigenous.
Mm-hmm.
My father's side were Purepecha, and
Oh,
um and my
wow.
dad, he grew up with his abuelos. He was raised by his grandmother, not his
Wow.
mother. So
Wow.
so she was also a midwife, right? So she had her
Wow.
maneras, she had
Yeah,
her
yeah.
costumbres, and
Wow.
she was a medicine woman, and
Mm.
she knew how to eat, she
Oh
knew
my
how to
gosh.
prepare traditional food. And and I had this exposure because my dad would recreate these meals at home. And so
Mm-hmm.
between my mom and my dad, they both were feeding my spirit, right? They were
Mm.
really feeding my ancestral genetic memory. They were feeding it and they were activating it. And but
Mm.
again, I didn't have that concept, I didn't have that understanding. And you know and for me, it didn't become a reality in terms of like understanding that I'm a little different in comparison to other people, was
Mm.
when my family moved to San Gabriel Valley. I was a
Oh.
teenager at this time,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody there was, a lot of people that I met there, they were like second generation,
Mm-hmm.
third generation.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Which
was
is
told,
different. Which
very
is
different,
different. Yeah.
very
Yeah.
different. And um and I was told that I had an accent, and they're like, "Oh, you have an accent. Like, you're not from here." And I was like, "I have an
Excuse
accent?"
me?
Like, I had no idea. Like,
Yeah.
I was like, "Huh?"
Mm.
And somebody pointed it out. They're like, "Oh, it's like an East LA accent." And I was like, "Well, I guess we have our own language. I guess we have our own like clicks
Our
and
vibe.
sounds,
Yeah.
you know?"
Yeah.
Um and I tried to, sort of, I negotiated my identity at that time
Mm-hmm.
for myself,
Mm-hmm.
because where I lived, or when we moved into, it was a really a very gang heavy neighborhood.
Mm.
And so I spend a lot of time in the streets, I spend a lot of time in the
Mm.
neighborhood, and you come across different, circles, you come across
Sure.
different people, you make friends with different cliques. And one of them was, the punkers, and then you had, your break dancers. We used to call them groovers back then. And so for me, I was able to navigate all these worlds. But I think what made it really interesting is that, because I was raised Católica,
Mm.
I would encounter, scenarios, or I would encounter like circumstances that would challenge my faith.
Mm.
And then I would question my faith, like, well, wait a
Mm-hmm.
minute, like, is this a sin?
Mm.
Am I being, am I going to go to hell?
Mm.
Especially when I was exploring my sexuality, because that was,
Oh.
something too that
Ooh,
was
that's a
very,
hot topic right there. Yeah.
I was like,
Yep.
is this
Yep.
a heaven? And ¿qué
Yeah.
está
What's gonna
pasando?
happen? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And but I think it all came together for me when I started to finally realize, you know what, I might be a first generation born here, and my family is very deeply rooted in cultura and very, very different. We're not eating, the first time I ever ate fast food, I was 12 years old. I walked
Mm.
into a Jack in the Box on Whittier Boulevard because I wanted to be cool.
Yeah.
I had no idea what to order. I stood there looking at the menu like a mencita. I was
Oh.
like, oh my goodness. And I was so embarrassed. And so the only thing I knew that sounded familiar to me were tacos. And when I got these tacos, I was like, what
Oh
I was like, these ain't
my God.
tacos.
This ain't tacos. No.
These ain't tacos. And again, it's
That's
because I was
amazing.
so nurtured,
Oh my
through
God.
my, abuelita knowledge, abuelita comidas,
I love it.
my
Yeah.
mother's recetas. And so, I eventually got it together, right? I began to own up to who I am.
Mm.
I began to understand that, along with like my, even going back to my Catholicism and my Catholic upbringing,
Mm.
there was other elements that were not necessarily Catholic in practice,
Mm-hmm.
but they were honoring the divine. You know what I'm
Mm, I
saying?
love
So
it.
I would go out to the rivers, and I remember being a chiquilla and just sitting there and like breathing with the water. You know, like I
Mm,
remember finding
yeah.
like life in what I was doing. I
Mm-hmm.
used to be really curious about
Wow.
plants, and I remember I would talk to them, and no one like really taught me to do that. I think I
Yeah.
just seen it happen, so I would
Mm-hmm.
replicate that behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And and I remember, like, even growing up, I would make these pot of like flowers and these mixes, and my mom would be worried. She'd be like, don't be mixing things, Claudia, like, I don't want you to get poisoned. And I was like,
Oh,
no, no, these are,
it's good.
this is good for me. And but again,
That's great.
right, because I was so like learning from, the outside influences that I had,
Mm-hmm.
I was almost shamed and kind of made to fear that what I was
Mm-hmm.
participating in was kind of like bad bruja vibes, like it was like the
Oh,
kind of things you want to do because it was Wiccan, or it was, that was
right.
the language that was given to me. And I was
Right,
like,
right,
oh,
right.
like I'm not trying to do that.
Yeah.
Like I grew up in nature. I grew up in
Mm-hmm.
environments. My dad took
Yeah.
me to the desert a lot. We went,
Mm.
we did camping, we went shooting. And I
That's
never
so
knew like
cool.
there was
Yeah.
campsites. People were like, oh, there's a camp. And I was like, campsite? Like we would just go. Like we were just
Yeah.
like rough, we would just
I
rough it.
love it. I love it.
And so, it's beautiful how like I've been able to embrace all this, and
Mm-hmm.
especially when I was like, finally becoming this young adult, that I then knew like I can make my own decisions.
Yes.
My family, yes, they've influenced me, yes, they've taught me what they know,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's up to me to decide, do I want to continue to pursue Catholicism? Do I want to continue to pursue, spirituality?
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually, began to become more and more aware of the historical atrocities that were introduced as a result of colonization, especially in
Mm-hmm.
Mexico and Mesoamerica, and
Mm-hmm.
different parts. And
Yeah.
so I grew a little resentment towards that. And I was like, well, this is a colonizer religion.
Mm.
And I'm really working hard to not, mimic the colonizer.
Mm-hmm.
And like right when I was, really questioning like very heavily, my comadre was like, hey, mujer, like, you know what, I'm part of this danza group now. And one of the elders has invited us to sweat, like, do you want to come?
Mm.
And I was like, yes, like let's do that.
Mm.
And so we went to Sweat Lodge, and I remember being in there, and it was really dark, it was really warm, and at that moment, I felt like I was home. I felt like
Mm.
I've been
It's
here
beautiful.
before, right? Because the invitation is that you're
Woo!
re-entering,
Yep.
the Madre Tierra, right? You're going back to the womb
Mm-hmm.
you came
Mm-hmm.
from. And,
Mm-hmm.
this is like on a cosmological,
Oh
spiritual
yeah.
realm level, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I just started crying. Like I just started
Mm.
crying. But for me, it was, they were like, it was like a rezo, it was a prayer.
Mm.
It was my offering.
Mm.
And so since then,
It's beautiful.
I really have never turned back. So I've
Mm-hmm.
been practicing very heavily indigenous spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, it's where then I've come to realize that yes, my cocina is sacred. Yes, it's where I get to enact what my friend Felicia Cucotzin Ruiz has shared with me over and over again. I get to enact my kitchen curandera gift, right? It's where
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to
Mm-hmm.
create medicine, because food
Mm-hmm.
is our medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Food is our palabra, food is our
Mm-hmm.
teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to really, situate myself right between food, culture, identity, and
Yes.
spirituality.
I
And this
love
is
it.
not to say that I don't necessarily support Catholicism or anything like that. Like I will attend baptismos, and I will
Oh.
go into my old church that I
Yeah.
grew up in. I mean, I used to be the
It's
sign
part of
language girl.
culture.
Yeah, when I
Yeah.
was at
Yeah.
church, because I went to Catholic school up to sixth grade, and I would literally be, during they would do what were they, the sacrament, the
Mm-hmm.
Holy First Communion.
Mm-hmm.
I was the girl that would be right there with the choir doing the sign language to the
Oh,
songs.
that's cool.
I mean, like that's how, invested
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was in this.
Totally.
And but again, I feel like I'm, because of the syncretism and the type of mestizaje that has occurred,
Yes.
it's not just, within people, but it's also within our belief systems, our culinary systems, right? There's
Mhm.
been a big mestizada that has occurred. Um, I have been able to appreciate, for example, La Virgen de Guadalupe a little differently,
Mm.
especially after learning about her transition from, from being, Kotlikwe to Tonantzin to
Mm.
Coatlashupe, the way Gloria
Mhm.
Anzaldúa has taught us, and
Mhm.
then into
Mhm.
like the Virgen de Guadalupe, and and just really finding comfort
Mhm.
in in what she represents, which is,
Mhm.
Madre Tierra Tonantzin. And in my household, we actually have brought the Virgen back. And
Mm.
so we do
It's
have
beautiful.
imagery of her.
Mm.
We have her as corn. So we have
Oh.
a corn weave of the Virgen. We also have her as like the Virgen Morena, and so it's really nice because I feel very grounded. I feel
Mm.
very protected,
Mhm.
and in me honoring her, I'm not necessarily honoring this colonial legacy. I'm honoring my indigenous legacy,
Yes.
and
Yes.
and the indigenous teachings,
Mhm.
um, through the recreation of the Virgen de Guadalupe. And my
Mhm.
daughter, she's so cute. She's like, I don't believe there's all these systems that we have that exist in terms of, faith systems. She thought,
Mhm.
I just believe in Guadalupe. And it's so cute because she calls her Guadalupe. And I'm
That's so
like,
cute.
oh, that's different,
I love it. I love it.
And yeah, so it's definitely been a journey for me in terms of my
Yeah.
background, and
Yeah.
and again, understanding that people see me differently.
Mm.
Especially when I was growing up, I was told a few times to go back to Mexico, and I was like, I wasn't even born in
Whoa.
Mexico. Like, I was born in
Oh my
Hollywood,
gosh. Wow.
and
Oh my
I
gosh.
was like, wait, what? Why am I being told this? And this is when I began
Wow.
to finally step out of East LA, step out of the neighborhood that we have moved to in San Gabriel Valley,
Mhm. Mhm.
that I began to hear,
Uh-huh.
this what we call noise, right? And
Yeah.
and also too, when I was in the SGV, I had a lot of white maestras,
Mm.
and it was, I remember being in seventh grade, and this is when I first started public school. And one woman, she basically said to us, this was in an English class. She said, you know what? She thought, it doesn't matter whether you learn or not, because at the end of the day, you're all just a bunch of beaners. And I
No.
remember
A teacher
thinking,
said this?
yeah. And I remember
Oh
being
my
like,
gosh. What horrible
I was like,
person. Why would
yeah,
she say that? Oh no.
this was in the classroom.
That's
And I
wild. That
remember
is
being
wild.
like, you know what? Like, and then, maybe I didn't have the language, but I was like, she can't be saying that to
That's not
us.
allowed. Yeah.
Yeah, like
That's terrible. Oh
that's
my
not
gosh.
okay.
Wow.
And so then I knew, oh, like, we're not, my gentes not liked here. But
Oh,
I
that's
knew
hard.
that we have a history. I knew that we have, and I'm like, my grandfather, started roots here for us.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and so, it's been something that, again, right, we have to negotiate, we have to navigate.
Yeah.
And as I began to really delve deep into like Chicana feminisms, and
Mm-hmm.
Chicana Indígena knowledge and
Mm-hmm.
epistemology, then I've realized, like, no, you know what? I'm gonna own who I am,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm a product of my ancestors. So there's a Alma Perez, no, esta, ¿cómo se llama? Not Alma Perez. Alma Zaragoza
Mm.
Perish, in her Chingona book, she says that we are the hijas rebeldes.
Yes,
We are
yes,
the
yes,
daughters of our ancestors. And
yes.
so,
Mm-hmm.
I began to really realize that and be like, nah, you know what? I'm gonna own this rebeldia,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm gonna stand by it, because,
Mm-hmm.
it is my ancestral rage. And I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
continue to perform it, because this is what I feel, and this is
Mm-hmm.
this is how it's manifesting in me. And that manifestation is what ultimately led me to want to, ride the academic wave, because
Mm-hmm.
I realized that um I need to be la cara, la cara and the corazon of my community.
Mm.
There isn't a lot of folks that, have access to academia, or know people that are in academia.
No.
And so I'm, very community driven, very family oriented. And so I knew that, the more knowledge I gained, the more I would be able to give back,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what my ancestors, fought for,
Yeah.
for us to continue the legacy, right, of who we are, so that we don't forget who we are also.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that sort of just kind of played out for me, and
Yeah.
years later, I've been able to just really blossom into the chingona mujer that I am today.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I love it. I love it. I love like everything you just shared. Wow. This is so
Hey.
amazing. No, this is so beautiful. And it's true, right? This so again with the terminology and the, academic words, right? Syncretism, right? The syncretism, the blending, mestizaje, like that is a big part of the reality for many of us, exploring our indigenous roots, indigenous past. I love how you describe that experience in the sweat lodge. That is sacred. That is sacred. That is a very beautiful, powerful encounter, right? With the earth, with Madre Tierra, Pachamama, right? That's so amazing. And yeah, it's true. And I love what you had mentioned before. Like when you would, as a child, you mentioned that you would spend a lot of time at the rivers and working with plants and things like that. Today we call it breath work, right? Today we
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
there's all the
yeah.
term. Oh, she was doing
Now,
breath work, like
yeah,
she
she was
didn't.
doing breath work, but
Yeah.
I didn't
I was being a
know.
kid. Yeah, exactly. I love it. I love it. And I do feel like there's something very intuitive about that,
Yeah,
right? I feel, oh, I'm getting chills. I
yeah,
feel like our ancestors call us
yeah,
back and call us
yeah.
and appear to us in
I
different
want to cry.
ways.
Yes.
I think that's what's happening, right? I think that's exactly what happens. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
with you, so my family, my mom's side is from Guatemala, my dad's side is from Ecuador. You know, I didn't see a lot of like Guatemalan professors or Latina professors at all. And so that's like you said, like that's why it was such a big deal for me to like make it, right? In other words, right,
Mm-hmm.
to get
Mm-hmm.
that PhD because in this world it does matter. You know what I'm saying? Like in terms of like being able to speak up. I think that's really what it is. It's like I do want to speak up in light of everything that's happened, right? To be a voice, some kind of voice, for my family, for my ancestors, for my community, in whatever shape it may take. But I think that's why. And I think that's true for a lot of people that I've talked to, different people of color, communities of color. It's like this isn't about me as a individual. This is like a part of a much bigger mission, of a bigger sense of responsibility, and I think that's really incredible. I love how you describe that. Super cool and super, super
Yeah,
cool.
no, absolutely. And that's I think that's another beautiful thing is that, just within this little conversation that we're having, right? It's short, it's brief, but like so many people can connect, so many people can relate.
Right.
And y por eso le damos, right? This is why we are still here. This is why we do the work that we do. This is why we are on this podcast.
Yes, exactly.
It's just, it's part of the work. It's part of the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And we're fulfilling that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I did want to touch on a couple more things that you mentioned as far as like Catholicism, right? Um, it is true. Alas, there is a lot in the history, a lot in Catholicism that is very problematic, that is very colonial, right? The imposition of Iberian Catholicism, and I always try to be specific, right? The arrival of the Spanish Empire, Portuguese, etc., to what we call now Latin America and the Caribbean. It was a particular brand of Catholicism.
Hmm. Hmm.
Catholicism is an international religion. Um, in any case, but that is so real, and especially what you mentioned as far as sexuality, it's true. So it's interesting. It's funny. I went to an all girls Catholic school, and I mention this because I noticed that my friends who went to co-ed schools, they obviously had a very different experience as far as dating, right? dating, boys, who do you like? You know, oh my God, the drama. Oh my gosh, like so and so broke up with so and so at lunch. Oh my God. It was different, right? It was different because there was no boys on our campus. It was just us girls, right? Um, so it's very interesting. That part is very interesting as far as like how sexuality is navigated. So we have kind of like the piece where what we're taught at right, what we're taught at home, what we're taught in church, and then what we figure out for ourselves, right? What we try to make sense of for ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is really fascinating. Yeah, it's very interesting. I think unfortunately, and I'll be honest, I think of a lot of women, even, you know, to be honest, even up until their 20s, 30s, 40s, etc., do not feel comfortable, right? They have
Hmm.
that messaging, you know, that little voice in their head being like, oh, this is dirty. Oh, I feel bad. Oh, I feel like, you know, a malinche. I feel like this. I feel right for being sexual, even though human beings are sexual creatures, right? So
Yes.
it's a whole thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, and there's so many layers, right?
Oh
There's so
yeah.
many layers to, who we are, especially as, as folks that, some folks might call it, reside in the borderlands, right? That navigate these lands and
Sure. Hmm.
these landscapes. And, but I feel like kind of going back to what you shared, you were talking about this, like this intuition.
Hmm.
And I think that, like, that to me is also something that, I've learned to appreciate.
Hmm.
I've learned to trust, as I walk and live in, urban
Yeah.
LA, right, inner
Hmm.
city,
Yeah.
is, my intuition. And there's also other names for it, gut feminism and so forth.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I've learned to trust it because,
Hmm.
I feel like it's part of that genetic memory, right? It's part of
Hmm.
like our abuelas taking care of us and saying, ojo,
Hmm.
or like how my dad would say, mija, ponte trucha,
I love it.
um,
Hmm.
and it's just really paying attention to the world. And I think that as Latinas, as women like yourself and myself, right? Like we've
Hmm.
been able to, trust that intuition,
Hmm.
and trust in the process, right? Of who we
Yes.
have become,
Yes.
because our intentions are good. And
Hmm.
when
Yeah.
our intentions are good, like, you
Hmm.
can't go wrong, you know what I mean? Like, if we're like doing this
You can't
work
go
for
wrong.
social justice reasons, or we're doing
Yes.
this work to be, to counter racism and to raise awareness, like,
Hmm.
then yeah, like this intuitive way of being, this intuitive way of existing, is, it's powerful. And
It
I feel
is.
like it speaks volumes to who we are, and how it shapes, our identity as well.
1,000%. Yeah, it's true. I look back and, you know, the handful of times in which I have ignored my intuition or I've ignored my gut instinct. Oh no, it just was, it just does not turn out well, you know.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's like, I feel like God or spirit is like, all right, try your way. You know what I mean? Like, see what
Yes.
happens. Go
Yes.
ahead and see what happens. And, yeah, I feel like those moments, it was because I was listening to other people, right?
Yes.
I let either society or other people who probably had good, right? They probably had good intentions for me. They weren't trying to hurt me or anything, but their advice was not what I felt, right? My
Yeah.
intuition, my gut was like trying to yell at me, being like, don't go or
Yeah.
say no to that offer.
Yeah.
It's not good for you, right? Um, yeah, it's so fascinating. That gut instinct, that intuition is so powerful. It's
Powerful.
so powerful. And
Powerful.
and many times it's unfortunately sometimes we ignore it, right? We're like, ah, yeah, 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 yeah. It's like, oh, I'm just like being scared. Ah, da, 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 da,
Yeah.
da. Like, let me give it another chance. Da, da, da. It's like, no, 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 no. You're feeling that for a reason.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think and that's the thing, is like, no one taught me that, or no one, like,
Mm,
it's something I had to figure out on my own.
right.
So, like, as a mom, right,
Yeah.
I have two children. One's an adult,
Oh.
male, and I have, a teenage female.
Oh.
And, one thing I tell her, when she was little, when really little, she would have like a problem or
Mm,
a situation, and I would ask her, "What does your body tell you?"
Oh, I love
and she would just stare at me. And
that. What? Like,
she was like,
what,
okay,
mom?
well, what part of my body? And I was like, your gut. And then she was so cute and she would say, gut, what do you think about this? And it was like
Mm-hmm.
the
That's so cute.
cutest thing because then she would have a
Now
response.
she knows. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so she would be like, well, my gut said this. And so, I in essence taught her to check in, check
Mm-hmm.
inward,
Mm-hmm.
ask yourself, okay, how are you feeling about this? And
Mm-hmm.
more specifically, just ask your gut because that's it's sensorial. It's a knower,
All of it. Mm-hmm.
right? Like yes, it's
Yeah, it's a
embodied
second
knowledge.
brain. I mean, now, right now, Western medicine's like, oh yeah, your gut health, gut, it's a second brain. It'll tell you a lot. Yes,
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 yeah, exactly.
yeah,
And so it's really nice that we have this level of awareness because it's something we can pass on and it's something that
it's
we
beautiful.
can definitely affirm, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we feel
Mm-hmm.
it,
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, let's affirm it. And
yeah,
I've learned to never like take away from that feeling from anybody, right? If they're like,
exactly.
I feel it in my gut, then I'm like, okay, so
Um,
you need to trust it.
Trust it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's true. Like, so I do try to, for example, if I have to make a decision, big decision, especially if it's like a bigger decision, to pray about it, to journal, even
Hmm.
even look at tarot cards, whatever, for that insight. Sometimes it can be really spot on. It's really amazing. But things like that, yeah, like it really, how can I explain this? It really comes down to going within, actually, because the answer is inside of you already. Like you do
Yes,
have the answer within you, and
exactly.
sometimes it's true. Like you were mentioning noise earlier. Sometimes it's a matter of like, quieting the noise, quieting the external voices or the expectations or society's, standards of what we should be doing. And you're 30, you should have XYZ done and you should be doing this. No, no, right? Like that's not that's not always helpful,
No.
right? It's
Yes.
not always
No.
helpful. Yeah, no,
Absolutely.
that's so amazing. That's so true.
Yeah.
um and I'm gonna go like a little bit even more woo woo for a second. I'm fairly convinced that I have had at least a couple past lives, right? And it's like, well, right, if what they say is true, if what they say is true, like I'm also carrying that knowledge, right? I'm also carrying that knowledge from those past lives and from my
Absolutely.
ancestors and angels and everybody else in the spiritual team, right? So
Yes.
that's part of it too. It's like, okay, spiritual team, what's up? What are we
What's
doing?
up? Yeah,
Yeah.
like it's time to gather,
Gather,
and and
consult. Una
and sometimes
consulta. Yeah.
that gathering, and
Yeah.
that's the fun part.
Yeah.
I feel
It
like
is.
even as
Yeah.
as older women, right? Some of that gathering, right? Okay, we're gonna gather our consult, and it might not
Mm-hmm.
even be humans, right? These are the
No. Yeah.
non-human realm, but that's part of indigenous knowledge. Sometimes we're taking out our obsidian stone. Sometimes we're taking
Yes.
out, our amethyst
Like
stone, and we have
crystals.
our
Yeah.
sage, and we
Yep.
have our
Oh
books,
yeah.
and we have our tarot cards, and
Mm-hmm.
we're
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we're gonna have a conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and
It is. Oh,
that's what it is. Like that's
it is.
where we're at, and I love it because right, it's a it's indigenous strengthening,
Mm-hmm.
and it's also an act of decolonizing, right? Decolonizing our healing system,
Mm-hmm.
decolonizing how we receive palabra,
Mm-hmm.
um and because we're working towards strengthening the indigenous ways, right? The indigenous philosophies and
Absolutely.
knowledge, and how we can go about in finding the answers, right? The answers that we're looking for, seeking,
Right.
or guidance.
Right. Right. Right.
And that's what's, I think, really powerful in terms of like the Chicanas today,
Mm-hmm.
and other Latina women, or Latin women, or Latinx
Mm-hmm.
folks, is that we have revitalized the tools, we have
Yes.
regenerated the wisdom,
Yes.
and so we have so many avenues to tap into
Yeah.
when it comes to seeking truth at its root, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's also known as panchepe,
Mm.
and so I celebrate all of that. To me, it's a win is a win.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is what indigenous resilience is about.
Mm.
And this is how I manifest it. And
Yes.
this is how I practice it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been given the gift of food. And so for me,
Mm.
it also resides in our recipes. It
Mm-hmm.
resides in the meal. It resides in the presentation.
So beautiful.
It's embodied in the story of our platos. And then,
Mm.
like you mentioned, right, then we come together, we sit around a mesa, and we
Mm-hmm.
have sobremesa, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
there's
Yes.
conviviality, and
Yes.
again, that's regeneration. All of that is a regenerative process. And so I truly align with regenerative knowledge,
Mm.
and regenerative spirituality,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and at the same time being open to, where sometimes it crosses with other ways of knowing. Like
For sure.
sometimes I find myself, tapping into my Mahayana Buddhist teachings. You know what I mean? And but
It's
I'm
knowledge. Yeah.
Chicana, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's like this
There's
is what's gonna
wisdom.
serve
Yes.
me. Yes, this is
There's
what's gonna
wisdom.
serve me at
Mm-hmm.
this
Mm-hmm.
moment, and that's what I'm gonna tap into. And
Yes.
and then other times, right, it's something else, and sometimes it's just a simple scolding from an elder, and like that's the medicine that I needed.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it comes in different forms. Recently, actually, Pope Francis, right, leader of the Roman Catholic Church, he said something to the effect of, these different traditions are actually different ways of connecting and experiencing divinity. I was so happy to hear and to see that he said that, because I think for a lot of people, they feel like they cannot explore other things, or they feel bad exploring other things, because then we get into the whole conversation about like salvation, and you have to be Christian, and you have to be this, and you have to be that. So I was sharing this in class, actually, because we were talking about, I teach ethnic studies, and we're talking about religion, and it had just happened. He had just said that, I think the day before or 2 days before, and my students were so pleased too. I was like, you know, if in other words, if he's recognizing it, I hope that other people can recognize it, that there is wisdom and beauty and value in a lot of different things, in a lot of different ways.
Mhm.
It's not
Exactly.
just like one size fits all, one type fits everybody.
No.
It just doesn't.
And and that also comes with like some of the strong Mexica teachings, and this has influenced a lot of LA. I feel like it's really it is very Mexica centric, but I feel like there's a
Mhm.
lot of knowledge there.
Mhm.
And it's an invitation for us to explore our own cultural indigenous roots from the different regions throughout Mexico. But one thing that I really embrace in Mexica knowledge systems is understanding the concept of ometeo,
Mm.
right? Ometeo is like the one all unifying creator. But
Yes.
what's beautiful in Ometeo is understanding that Ometeo is a combination of masculine and feminine energy. It's Omesiwat and Ometecutli. And so they come
Mhm.
together to form this union
Mhm.
of energy, this union of knowledge.
It's beautiful.
And
Yeah.
so I think that too, right? It's like, you know what? There's a multiplicity of knowing,
Mhm.
and there's also energy in knowing. And
Mhm.
so and some of it might be a little more firmer than another, and that's okay. We need to have that that
That
balance.
balance.
And
Mhm.
and I've been, it's been taught to me as like ecological chaos, but there's balance in that even, right? And so
Mhm.
so when I'm thinking about my own spirituality, when I'm thinking about my Catholic upbringing,
Mhm.
I think about this real holistically, and I think about, well, what introduced religion in the first place, and it was the
Mhm.
cosmos. I
Mhm.
mean, even going back to like ancient Europe, um because
Right.
that's something that's been influenced on us, right, living here in the US. But again, like there was no religion really in place because until folks then began to find meaning in the
Yes.
stars.
Yes.
And in the past I taught it was an ethnic studies course, and spirituality or
Mhm.
religion. But I
Mhm.
was like, well, let's
That's so
look at the
cool.
root of religion. How did it even get started?
Right.
Because there's roots to everything.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
let's go there.
Mhm.
And it really shifted my students too. They were like, wait a minute, hold on. So you're telling me that this then became, XYZ? And I'm like, yes,
The origin
the
stories, the myths.
origins. Yeah. And then
Human
all
beings have always sought meaning. We've always sought meaning. People,
very curious
why,
people.
we are, yeah. It's like, why is the rain come? Why is the
Yeah.
volcano happening? Why is this? Why is that? Why is there death? Why is there, right? Yeah, it's human beings trying to make sense
Yeah.
of reality, right? A lot
Exactly.
of times, yeah, yeah. I know. I love that. That is really amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, Claudia, this has been so great. So as we kind of wrap
Yes.
up, I know that you hosted an event recently,
Yes.
and I would love for you to talk about that because I think it really kind of encapsulates the work that you do.
Yes.
And then, if you can kind of share with us at the very end, like what advice you would share with young people today.
Yes. Yes, for sure. So like I've shared, I am a culinary anthropologist, and I'm also a traditional plant-based chef. Um, and I've also have gotten some training working with, other relatives other than plants, with other native chefs throughout this country. And so I recently was invited to do a chef's table. A chef's table is a very intimate experience, dining experience. Usually it's a process of different courses. This was over at La Plaza Cocina de Gloria Molina in
Mm,
downtown LA. And, I went ahead and curated a four-course um, dinner experience. It was in a blue corn amaranth atole with a mesquite pan de muerto that I
mm.
coated with some maple and cempasúchil flour.
Oh.
Like that was, it was part of the garnishing, and that, like I shared with the community that was there. I reminded them that this was, um, a way to honor the ancestors that we are repping together in this
Mm,
space. I reminded them that when we walk with, seven generations back, and the
mm,
work that we're doing today is to influence seven generations forward.
mm,
And so, the atole was also to honor our abuelas, because it was as a result that our abuelas, survived and thrived, that we have
mm-hmm,
atole.
mm-hmm.
If they didn't, we wouldn't have atole. And so,
It's true.
atole was representative of abuelita knowledge. And so, and then the pan de muerto was again using mesquite, was a way to just, really, allow, our muertes to know that we are having this cena in honor of them. And
Mm,
so it was an invitation to them
it's
to
beautiful.
join us.
Oh.
And this is what's really profound. And this is just the first course, mind you. Is that I went ahead and through, my expertise, my background, I'm able to curate such an experience that merges ethnic studies
Mm-hmm.
and food studies, right,
So
through
good.
this
Yeah.
cultural Chicana indígena lens.
Mm.
And so I'm teaching, I'm cooking, and I'm feeding, right? I'm doing all this at the
All the
same
things.
time.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went into our second course, and our second course was actually a Three Sisters Pozole.
Mm,
And what I did is I talked about, the Three Sisters agriculture. I talked about, its importance in Mesoamerican diet,
mm, mm-hmm.
and and it was beautiful to see, like, the guests just really sit and think, like, hold on
Mm,
here, like we are really consuming straight up native
mm,
foodways, that are
mm-hmm,
here. And I would remind them, let this food, be an activator, allow this food to penetrate you. And they were like,
mm.
whoa,
Wow.
wait,
Whoa, whoa.
what? Yeah, what's
Yeah.
going on here?
Yeah, yeah.
And then we went into our third course, and our third course is for, and this is only something that I do during the fall, is I make a blue corn, amaranth tamal, with
Yum.
a slow braised bison that, I was able to source
Mm,
from, the Dakota, so from the Lakota people. And um and it was really beautiful and profound, because I
wow.
unwrapped every tamal with its husk. I placed it down. I honored it with a little bit of, guajillo, just to kind of give it a little bit more of a kick.
Mm,
And then I reminded folks, like, you know what, like, this was an elder bison. It's done
mm,
it's lived its journey, it's lived its cycle.
mm.
But we need to know that, this platillo is also an altar. It's also an ofrenda.
Wow.
And um and
Mm,
so, I reminded folks that it's very important for us to also honor the food. And so I went
yeah.
ahead and
It's
garnished it
beautiful.
with a beautiful line of, micros, which are they were the
Mm,
arugula micros. But I
mm,
reminded folks that, the bison is it's a grass feeder,
Mm.
and so we were feeding the bison, right? So giving it, it's
Oh, yeah. It's
it's
incredible.
greens so that it can feed us. And so folks were
Mm.
like, "Oh, this is a reciprocal experience." I said, "It absolutely is," right?
Mm.
Because in our understanding, life and death is still life because there's spirit world.
Yeah.
It's just a different way of
Different
living.
form. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so for it was just like, so it was like this sacred like merging, and so then we
So
had our final
incredible.
dinner. Yeah, we had our
So
final
good.
course, and it was I made these amaranth skulls, and
Oh.
they're really deeply like heavily put together with cacao, pepita, sunflower seeds, like maple, you name it. It's all
Mm.
indigenous seeds, all
Mm.
indigenous ingredients, chia, and I made a pecan cream. And so I
Mm.
placed the skull right on top of the pecan cream. I also made these raw cacao, avocado cacao balls, or
Ooh.
like truffles. I placed them on there with some berries, and then I got the marigold and I just spread it across,
So
and I
good.
let folks know that what, this again is a way to make sure that our ancestors are seen, because marigold is the light.
Mm-hmm.
It's a light that folks from spirit world can see.
Mm.
And so in eating this final dish, it was a way to eat with our muerte, right? To have them there with us eating together. So I had folks think about somebody who is in spirit world, or
Yeah.
kind of speak to that truth, to that kind of spiritual realm,
Mm-hmm.
and join forces, become one with muerte. and
Mm.
um and so again, right, and throughout this, I'm talking about colonization, and how the colonizers didn't want us to have these foods, and why
Right.
it's beautiful that they are here, and why indigenization is important, and how it's healing to our body, right? So
Yeah.
really rethinking indigenous nutrition, indigenous sazon, why flavor
So
is
good. Yeah.
important, right? And so it
It's
was just this
perfect.
beautiful way to honor ourselves, honor our culture, honor our identity, honor our ancestors, in like present inner city Los Angeles.
Mm.
And this was just a couple days ago.
Yeah.
And so it was just a beautiful, wonderful celebration. It was just a beautiful way to rethink our relationship to food, our relationship to the kitchen. And I had many folks there say to me, you know what, thank you, because
Wow.
I've been really kind of hesitant, or haven't been cooking much, and I've just realized it's because I've been cooking the wrong things. I don't have a
Hmm.
relationship with these things. And so I want to
Right.
rekindle that. And
Yeah.
one way to rekindle, or to even activate my indigeneity, because maybe I wasn't
Mm.
raised with elders and I don't go to ceremony, but if
Right.
I start working with the food and eating the food of my ancestors,
Yeah.
then I am regenerating, right? Ancestral knowledge,
Yes.
ancestral culinary art, ancestral technologies,
Mm-hmm.
and really indigenizing my nutrition, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that we
Mm-hmm.
can
Mm-hmm.
live healthy, elder lives. We all want to
Yeah.
become elders at some point. I do.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
Oh, so amazing.
I'm thinking about young Chicanas, and other young Latinas. For me, I think like one of the things that I want to share is that we do live in a very complex society.
Mm.
You're going to be challenged, you're going to make mistakes, and don't be so hard on yourself. One,
Mm.
forgive yourself, and sometimes that's hard. I've learned to self embrace, so I literally hug myself from one arm to the other, me abrazo,
Oh.
and I just tell myself, like, it's all right, it's okay, baby
Oh.
girl, it's
Hmm.
okay.
It's okay.
Like,
Yeah.
you'll just do better, you know do better.
Yeah.
Be patient also. I
Mm.
feel, I was raised like everything was quick, 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 and
Yeah.
so you kind of expect to have like a quick result every time. And
And if it
I've
doesn't come, it feels like, oh,
yeah,
yeah.
so you're like,
Mm.
we get frustrated because it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, it's taking
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
forever. And
Mm-hmm.
so I feel like, patience really is a virtue. Like, it really
Mm-hmm.
truly is. And not just like being patient with like your partner or your child. Like, I mean, really being patient, like you're going to
Mm-hmm.
get that degree, mamacita,
Right.
you're going to get that job. You're going to,
Yeah.
get, start that business, like you will.
Yeah.
Just breathe, right? One day at a time. Like if you
Mm.
set out 5 goals for the day, you only achieve one, it doesn't mean you
It's
failed,
okay.
right?
Yeah.
It means, like, what, there's other things
Be
going
proud of
on.
yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, you've taken that step.
Hmm.
Sometimes, like, before we learn to run, we gotta crawl.
Hmm.
And so, let's take a little bit of time to nurture ourselves, and
Hmm.
just be a little bit more patient with ourselves. I feel is really vital. And then ultimately, right? When and if you can, build an altar.
Yes. Oh, I love it.
Build an altar, and an altar, and dedicate it to you, right? You don't even have to dedicate it
Mm.
to the ancestors, or dedicate it to an element, or to a god or a goddess. Like,
Hmm.
maybe just build one for yourself, right? Put the
Mm.
things on there that make you happy. If it's a
Mm.
stone, if it's a flower, if it's, a letter that, an old friend wrote you, if it's a feather you found outside while on a walk, put that together for yourself, right?
Yeah.
And know that you're honoring yourself, right? And you are sacred. Um, and you wouldn't be here if again, if it wasn't for the resilience of your spirit, the resilience
Hmm.
of your mother's spirit, your grandmother's spirit. And know that everything is about divine timing. And
Hmm.
um, you know keep your faith, whatever your faith system is, hold on to it. Be open to
Yeah.
other systems, other ways of knowing, like, and yeah, it might be scary sometimes, because you're like, what, I was raised Catholic, and all of a sudden I'm going to go to sweat lodge. Is this, against it? No, it's not. Like, this is not, you know it's an experience, and be
Yeah.
open to experience, because that's where knowledge resides.
Oh, so
And
good.
and
So good.
and finally, take that bath, right? If you can, take that bath. Like, it's okay to slow down. It's okay to
Yes.
not finish
Yes.
that assignment tonight. Get
Mm.
in the bath. Whether it's Epsom salt or rosemary or
Right.
lavender, whatever it is, or a bath bomb, like, just do it. Soak,
Slow down.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Slow down,
Hmm.
breathe,
Hmm.
inhale, exhale, and do it again. And then the next day, right? Restart,
New
hit
day.
that
Hmm.
refresh button, y
Yeah.
vámonos.
Oh my gosh. I love it. Oh my God. That was so beautiful. Thank you for sharing everything that you shared, but
Thank you.
especially about this recent event that you had and the response, that people are realizing or waking up to, like, wow, what is my connection to food? What is my connection to cooking? How can I honor my culture, my heritage, my ancestors in in these ways? I think that's so amazing.
Yes,
And I love that. Just the encouragement for young people to have compassion for themselves.
yes,
It's okay to slow down. It's okay to slow down a little bit and give yourself grace, and to really, I think, like, stay connected to that, that inner voice, that ancestral wisdom. I think that's really, really powerful.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh my goodness. This was amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Dr. Claudia Cerrato.
Thank
Oh
you.
my, this was very rich. This was a really rich, a beautiful, beautiful session. Thank you, folks who are listening or tuning in. This is the Gold Hoops and God podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Guerra. Please join our community. You can find me on Instagram, goldhoops_God. I have a YouTube channel where there are videos of each interview, and also a Facebook page. And of course, you can stream the audio anywhere you find your podcasts. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one. Thank you, Dr. Claudia.
Y gracias a ti. De
Bye.
todo.
Thank you.